The studio was electric with nostalgia the moment Eddie Murphy stepped on stage, a living legend whose presence alone drew applause that rattled the rafters. And Stephen Colbert, ever the well-prepared host, leaned into the excitement, throwing early softballs that let Eddie shine, laughing along with the audience as Murphy rattled off his signature impressions and slid into familiar comedic rhythms. But somewhere between the applause breaks and the laughter, the tone shifted as Colbert, known for his pointed political angles and sly jabs, moved the conversation away from legacy and toward controversy, bringing up Eddie's early career material and asking whether, in light of today's evolved sensitivities, he felt ashamed or compelled to apologize for past jokes, and though Eddie tried to brush it off with his usual charisma, tossing out a joke about people being too sensitive to laugh these days, Colbert didn't let it go, doubling down with references to old stand-up routines and quoting critics who labeled Murphy's early work as problematic or offensive by modern standards. And it was clear, both to the audience and to Murphy himself, that the interview had taken a turn, one that didn't feel like a conversation anymore, but a trial wrapped in studio lights. And Eddie's face hardened, his body language shifting from open to guarded as he looked Colbert dead in the eye and said, "Man, I came here to talk, not to be dissected." And the tension crackled visibly. The laughter evaporated, and Colbert, not backing down, responded that public figures had a responsibility to reckon with their impact, which was when Eddie, ever calm but visibly irritated, leaned forward and said, "You want me to be? Sorry for making people laugh 40 years ago, for saying the things people paid to hear, the same jokes you probably laughed at back then. You think you can judge me with hindsight, like you weren't part of the same world?" And that moment landed heavy, silencing not just the studio, but the millions watching at home, who sensed the collision wasn't about jokes or politics. It was about generational ego, about what happens when cultural change is weaponized in the name of progress while forgetting the past was lived differently. And as Colbert tried to pivot to a lighter topic, offering a strained laugh and asking about Murphy's new film, Eddie sat back in his chair, folded his arms, and said nothing, the silence more deafening than any punchline. And after a beat, he slowly reached for the mic, hooked it from his collar, and stood up, walking off the set as the audience gasped, and Colbert awkwardly tried to recover, stammering a joke about technical difficulties before cutting. Too commercial, and within minutes, the footage exploded online, with hashtags like #EddieWalksOff and #ColbertClash trending across platforms, sparking debates that stretched far beyond entertainment, with some praising Murphy for refusing to be shamed for a past he already survived, while others argued that he missed an opportunity to show growth. But what none could deny was that the clash was real, raw, and resonant, triggering a nationwide debate about comedy, context, and cancellation, and Murphy, for his part, remained silent for several days, declining interviews and letting the moment speak for itself. While Colbert addressed it the next night with a rehearsed monologue about holding space for discomfort and understanding evolution, but viewers weren't buying it. And ratings for that week's show saw a rare dip, with many calling out the irony of a host who built his career on parody now being accused of hypocrisy for failing to let a comedian be a comedian. And when Murphy finally broke his silence via an Instagram video filmed from his backyard, wearing a hoodie and talking directly to camera, he didn't offer an apology or a rant. It's just a reflection. If you want to talk about what I said in 1982, let's talk about it like you lived in 1982. Otherwise, let people grow without putting them on trial. Comedy's not supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be real. And that line became its own kind of anthem, printed on shirts, quoted by fellow comedians, and even referenced in editorials from both the left and right, who found in Murphy's calm but powerful response a rare moment of nuance, where a man could defend his past without disowning the present. And as the noise faded and time passed, Eddie returned to the press circuit for his film, this time with carefully selected interviewers and a no-nonsense energy, while Colbert quietly shifted the tone of his show, easing up on confrontational segments and focusing more on satire and scripted monologues, perhaps chastened by the realization that not every guest will play the part written for them. especially legends who earned their place without asking permission. And in the end, the walk-off didn't diminish Eddie Murphy, it elevated him, reminding a generation drowning in outrage that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when the room turns fake is simply get up and walk out. The aftermath of Eddie Murphy's walk-off spread like a brush fire through every layer of media. From primetime panels to podcasts, from YouTube breakdowns to TikTok duets. And while Colbert's camp released a statement calling the incident a miscommunication between two entertainers with great respect for one another, the public wasn't buying the polished diplomacy because the moment felt too raw. It's too real, too unrehearsed to be dressed in press release clothing. And the reaction wasn't simple, it fractured along generational, racial, and cultural lines, with some young viewers claiming Eddie was unwilling to be accountable, while others, including many comedians and artists of color, argued that what happened wasn't about accountability, but about control, about the long-standing tension between institutions that capitalize off black culture and the legends who built it. And Eddie, never known for political monologues or lengthy op-eds, let the silence stretch just long enough to build curiosity before breaking it during a surprise stand-up appearance in Atlanta. Walking on stage unannounced to a crowd of stunned fans and delivering an hour of sharp, unfiltered material that danced around the Colbert incident without naming names, filled with lines like, "Now you can't tell a joke without checking if it passed the morality quiz. I want the laugh but not the lesson." Lines that hit the room like thunder, and what made it all land wasn't just the timing, but the delivery, because Murphy wasn't angry, he wasn't bitter, he was surgical. Returning to the roots of his genius with a self-assuredness that reminded audiences why he had been untouchable for decades. And while media tried to revive the controversy, asking other celebrities to comment, most avoided taking sides, afraid to alienate either fan base. Except for a few industry veterans comics like Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, and even Jerry Seinfeld, who voiced open support for Murphy, calling the walk-off a protest against curated conversations. And what followed was a surge in viewership for Murphy's older specials. Sales spikes in his streaming content, and a resurgence of interest in his upcoming projects, with new offers pouring in from platforms eager to be associated with what now felt like a cultural revival rather than a scandal. And meanwhile, Colbert found himself navigating unfamiliar terrain, not cancellation, but public coolness, a dent in his credibility that couldn't be erased by another monologue or musical guest. And behind the scenes, CBS executives reportedly met to discuss softening the show's tone, rebalancing its blend of politics and entertainment, especially after internal analytics showed a drop in key demographics in the days following the Murphy interview. And all the while, Murphy stayed silent again, choosing not to engage directly but allowing his work and appearances to speak for him. Whether through a heartfelt podcast conversation with a younger black comedian about legacy and pressure, or a quiet appearance at a community arts center in Chicago, where he told teenagers that surviving this business means knowing when to speak and when to walk away. A quote that circulated far and wide, cast on Canva posts and printed over moody backdrops. Embraced by artists and professionals alike, who saw in it a quiet resistance to being reduced by clickbait narratives. And the moment began to take on a new shape, not one of controversy, but of clarity, the kind that shakes institutions out, of complacency, and forces them to ask harder questions about who controls the conversation and who gets to define cultural value. And months later, when Eddie finally sat for a full interview on a streaming talk show known for long-form honesty, he addressed the walk-off head-on for the first time, leaning in and saying, "I wasn't mad. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just done talking to a man who wasn't really listening." And that line, stripped of dramatics, rang louder than any headline, because it crystallized what millions had felt watching the moment unfold. The subtle violence of being invited to a stage not to be celebrated or understood, but to be dissected under the banner of accountability. And while Colbert continued to host and book guests, there was a noticeable chill in how some sat across from him. An unspoken awareness that even laughter had to be negotiated. And Eddie, free of the studio lights and scripted cues, kept moving, kept creating. Not chasing redemption, but redefining what artistic freedom looked like in a world that had forgotten why it needed comedians in the first place. not to repeat the current challenge, to reflect, to discomfort in service of truth and enjoyment. Just survive the moment he owned it, walking away not in retreat but in victory, not to escape,